All right. Welcome, everyone. I am just checking on a couple of buttons on my end, making sure everything is running. Great. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar. We have something really special lined up for you today, actually. It is a fireside chat. We have a wonderful panel. We are going to be focusing on maximizing the value of Salesforce with app development for nonprofits. But before we dive in, I want to introduce CRM Science to all of you who are not familiar with us. So I have a couple of highlights here. For those of you who don't know us, we are a Salesforce Gold consulting partner. We are also a Salesforce.org impact partner. And so we're very well versed in the nonprofit industry. We have several people on our team who have a long history of working with nonprofits and or for nonprofits. And we are a full service consulting firm. So what that means on a day-to-day basis is that we can take care of pretty much anything that you need on the Salesforce platform. So whether that is strategizing on how to best leverage the Salesforce platform for your organization, to user experience, custom development, user adoption, we do it all. And as you can see here, we have a bunch of awards that we've won for our work with our clients. So we are pretty proud of those. And yeah, Salesforce is what we live and what we breathe. On the next slide, I have a couple of housekeeping items. So we have a lot of people on the webinar today, so all of you are muted. But I do encourage you to engage with us. So there's the Q&A feature in Zoom that you can use to ask your questions. And then also, share your use cases, share what you're doing on the Salesforce platform for your organization. And then definitely after the webinar, we encourage you to follow up with us and engage in a conversation and just talk to us how we can be helpful to you. And that is all for me. On the next slide, I want the panelists to have a moment to introduce themselves. We are so honored to have you guys here, and Matt is going to be hosting the panel session for the next 45 minutes or so. Matt works at CRM Science. So Matt, why don't you start off and then have the panelists introduce themselves as well, and then take it away for the conversation. How about that?
Sure, thanks very much, Diana. Just checking you can hear me?
We can.
So hi everyone, I'm Matt Thomas. I'm the Director of Strategic Programs here at CRM Science. I'm really pleased to be hosting today's panel with a couple of one of our great customers and of course our great partner, Kendall here from Salesforce.org. I wanted to share a little bit of my background and how it is I came to be here hosting this panel. So I have a long background in sales operations, working for a couple of global telcos, most recently at Vodafone, where I ran a very large Sales Cloud implementation. And that's how I ended up getting to know Salesforce and really understanding the power of the platform, putting together a global Sales Cloud implementation, so 26 countries. But I then joined Salesforce as a customer success director, starting out in the telco and media space, but subsequently moving to the nonprofit space, where I supported a number of Salesforce.org's both strategic and medium-sized nonprofit organizations in areas such as the technology and driving value and adoption and what have you. I'd like to hand it over to John McKenney from AACR to do a brief intro. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Hi, this is John McKenney. I'm the Director of Platform Engineering at the AACR. My background, been in IT for a little over 22 years, primarily as an architect developer. I've been working with the Salesforce platform for, I'd say, at least 12 years now, both as a enterprise customer and also as a partner. So I've been through the the partner program to put an application out on the App Exchange, which we'll talk about today. And also I've done large scale Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, and just pure custom implementations on the platform. I have a team of 6, 7 including myself at the AACR. And real quick about the AACR, we are a scientific driven organization. We have over 48,000 members in 127 countries. Our focus is really to support the lab researchers and give them everything they need, from grants to support any way that we can to support cancer research. And my team is synonymous with the platform. The platform is Salesforce, so our scope is large. And everything that we're going to talk about today starts with the Salesforce platform at the core. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So Kendall, over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kendall Warsaw, and as you can see, I'm Director of Nonprofit Success at Salesforce.org. I came to the nonprofit world kind of through a career at Deloitte Consulting, doing some major system implementations, change management, process reengineering. And one of my customers decided to go public. And as I was helping them go through all kinds of business improvements in preparation for the IPO, they created a corporate foundation, and they actually asked me to create it and then asked me to run it. So I ran the foundation, a corporate foundation, for 8 years as the executive director. And what I found is I really enjoyed working with the nonprofits and helping them build capacity, be more efficient. And I found that technology was not something that was very prevalent around the nonprofits that we supported. So I then went on to work with to consult to many nonprofits. I also then went to work for a software company that focused on grants management and foundations, and helped those customers understand the importance of grant makers and funders helping to build capacity and efficiency with nonprofits. So I came to Salesforce about 4.5 years ago. I work with some of our most strategic accounts within Salesforce.org, including Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, American Red Cross, American Cancer Society. And these organizations have massive Salesforce coursing through their veins. So a lot of products that we use, not just within the nonprofit world, but throughout many other use cases. So really happy to be here and look forward to speaking with you.
Thanks, Kendall. And I'm really pleased that we put together this panel today. That I think you'll have heard from us all that we have a mixture of both for-profit and non-profit experience, and I think that's kind of important. Often we can get into a little bit of tunnel vision in our chosen industry, right? And that causes us to kind of limit the way that we look at how technology can be used. And so my colleagues here on the panel, and I know a number of you out there listening have a wider experience, and I think it's really important to bring that experience to bear in whatever we're doing right now. To that end, one of the things we're going to be talking about a little bit today are actually use cases for Salesforce. So, what can you put on the platform that's maybe a little bit non-traditional for nonprofits? So outside of the sort of the fundraising or specific program management, what else can be done on the platform to drive value? So I'd really ask you to share those in the questions, and then let's get a little bit of a dialogue going. That'll add some real value to the rest of the people who are listening today. So I've grouped today's sort of conversation into 3 areas, where the first, and I think this is a very important one, is like, why should nonprofits consider Salesforce for app dev? What's the real value of doing, of putting use cases, onto the Salesforce platform? And I think for me, the really important one, and that I always try to encourage my customers when I was at Salesforce to do, and one which I'm now encouraging here at CRM Science, is to really sweat the asset, really get the value maximized for the license, right? So, everybody that you have in your nonprofit who has a Salesforce license will be using it for what I call an anchor use case, right? There will have been a reason to either choose Salesforce or that potentially you are considering Salesforce. So every other use case that you put on that license is kind of multiplying the value, right? So one use case is 1x, two use cases is 2x. And I think that's like really critical. You know, this is something we did a lot at Vodafone, where all of our salespeople had access to Salesforce. They all had a license. And so every time we needed some sort of business process to be automated, the first thing we did was look at Salesforce and was Salesforce potential for that, just so that we could drive value, right? Limit our spend. And that becomes incredibly important for nonprofits, you know, where money's tight. Every penny that you get, you know, you want to be able to put towards your mission. And so I think that to a certain extent, you know, when we consider Salesforce as an app dev platform, it really is about like, it might not be the perfect platform, and it might take some upfront work to build that. But really now, are you really delivering the value on that license? So Kendall, I know that some of your customers have gone through this kind of thought process. Have you got any examples?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, when we look at Salesforce as an overall platform that supports the core processes across an entire organization, we have all kinds of customers that are thinking beyond the NPSP, beyond the fundraising. You know, what are some other either apps or development that they can do? I have one customer that actually is global. They have thousands of users across the globe. And they actually created an app for travel approvals. Very important to get travel approvals, even more important now with COVID and understanding, you know, what the limitations as we start to come out of COVID might be. And so they went ahead and built that right on the platform.
That's great. And so, and given that all of their users were already using a Salesforce license, right? Why buy another application? I mean, you know, I really consider this anytime you're thinking, well, should we go and buy a new system? That not only are you maximizing the value of that Salesforce license, but you're also saving cost elsewhere in terms of, you know, buying a new application. Having said that, you know, I know that at times, rather than building a new application, it's possible to buy in from the App Exchange. And I know, John, you've had some real success sort of app dev around an App Exchange partner. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our biggest success really was where our journey started in 2018 was the purchase of the migration and purchase of an association management platform that bolts on top of Salesforce. And, you know, that was really the motivating factor to get the organization onto the Salesforce platform, was this vision of a more simplistic platform, something that you can do everything on and, you know, build with smaller teams and really add some value. So for our organization, like any other organization, you buy a product and there are things that the product does great that map directly to your business model. And there are things that it does great, but maybe doesn't map to your business model. And when I think of Salesforce, I think of a platform where you can look at a commercial product, something that is supported, and really extend it without any true loss in fidelity to what that manufacturer is offering. And for us, while we did do some significant customization to this association product, what it ended up providing us was a complete transactional backplane to our organization, which we've never had before. So we had our financial system, and all of our financial transactions had to be batch loaded into the system. If we had our publications division or we had donations, all of these major business areas would essentially have to reconcile with our master financial system through data loads and reporting. Now, the byproduct of an association management product is that it has the portal and it has the subscription model on top of it. We were able to basically write our own custom order API that takes the AACR business logic and put that right over top of what the vendor provided, so that the vendor product still works as designed for the use case that we purchased it for, which is the the renewal and the new membership process. But we're able to now use it for any business line, all of our transactions feeding through one system and reconciling back to our financial system. So that's just one example where, if you think about the value to purchase some other product or to use your financial system to handle transactions from disparate systems, is really a tough play. It can be very expensive, and there's too much sophistication or complexity between the models. So for us, that's just one really good example where we're getting huge value out of that license, with people in our organization that are committing transactions to this, and they probably have no idea that they're really even a Salesforce user in that scenario. So.
No, that's great, John. And you really raise an important point there that I'd like to raise about data, and kind of like really unlocking the value of the data. If you think across all the different systems that organizations now have, to really maximize the value of that data, which data has such a huge value in today's world. It is kind of costly, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of management to unlock the data and manage that across different applications, right? Integrations, obviously there are a lot of products out there. I know Salesforce has a product that helps with those integrations. But if you're able to build another use case like right there in the same platform, there's no integration, right? You're able to really unlock that, and you're not only able to unlock it for insights, but also for use cases. Right, so now that data, rather than complex integrations, and now all of a sudden, well, is that really worth it for that particular use case? Now it's like, it's right there. We can use that data, whether it's employee data, right? I mean, a great example is where you just use that user data, right, as employee data, and you're able to provide kind of employee apps with the data that you already have against that user record.
Sure. And if I may, Matt, real quick on the value proposition, we've all experienced, everyone on this call has experienced the COVID pandemic. And I can tell you, for us, as a largely physical meeting-based organization, that if we didn't have the Salesforce platform, it would have been a huge challenge for us. We can't use Zoom for everything. We have probably 6 different platforms depending on, the scenario. And there's no system that I know of in this world, and I've worked on plenty, where you could pivot in less than 4 weeks and develop in what's now recognized as an industry leading virtual event in the scientific space. So that's the true value, because it costs nothing on top of what we already have. And because we're a community user, we now had a platform that anybody could log into across any computer, across any technology. It just works. And we don't have to worry as an organization about supporting those users, because if you can get into a browser and you have a modern, if you have a modern browser and your computer is modern, there's really no support. So that's just another value proposition.
Thanks, John. And I want to touch briefly on adoption. Whatever it is you've bought Salesforce for, it's really not going to deliver value if people aren't using it. And I know this is something that Salesforce's customer success group spends a lot of time thinking about. And in my opinion, and certainly my experience, what I've seen is when applications are developed right on the Salesforce platform, a user who's grown accustomed to working in Salesforce for that anchor use case, whether it's fundraising, sales, customer support, another application that basically has the same page layouts, right, the same look and feel, is significantly easier to adopt. Furthermore, I always used to say, that if you have a person now in Salesforce to do, use case B, there is a chance that they're going to make the updates that you really want, in whether that's in, to some sort of contact record, update their activities, whatever the sort of the main reason you bought Salesforce for. They might do it while they're in there, right? But they're definitely not going to do it if they're not in there. So the more reasons you have for your users to get inside Salesforce in its wider sense, the greater your adoption of any individual component is going to be. Kendall, I'm sure you have many many opinions on driving adoption in Salesforce. Any thoughts on those additional applications that might be housed and how that drives adoption?
Well, one thing I would like to point out is it's really important. It's more about the process of getting those use cases into your Salesforce system. So you bring up a good point, Matt. If you have 5 core use cases and you only have 2 within Salesforce and the other 3 are being used either through a manual process or other legacy or other systems, it's not only a disparate situation, but it also is pulling away from the driving adoption within Salesforce. So I think a couple things I would point out here is it's really important to continuously think about what are the use cases and how can we get those into our system. And what's really important about that is making sure that you're constantly talking to your users, getting that information and making them a part of it. Because a big part of adoption isn't just about, hey, are you using the system? It's if people are involved in getting those processes onto the system, you're going to find better adoption. So I think that's a really important aspect of how you get it into the system.
Look, that's a great segue as well, Kendall. So I appreciate that into this sort of next theme, which is kind of what can you do on the Salesforce platform, right? I mean, I've always sort of found a little bit of a challenge when describing Salesforce in any one organization. There tends to be a view of it does whatever the main reason you bought it for, and that's it, right? So for a long time when I was back at Vodafone, I had sort of people outside sales saying, well, it's a sales tool, isn't it? And I also saw that a lot in some of my customers in the nonprofit side saying, well, it's for fundraising, or that's just for our call center. But the reality is that it can be used for just about anything, right? You can do your app dev on Salesforce. So I thought it was worth, spending a little bit of time talking about some specific use cases that we've seen, and I'd love the attendees to pipe up if they have any ideas. Although I can't see the question, so Diana, you might have to pop back off mute there and let me know. But just to get those kind of creative juices flowing, right? This is about innovation, right? Innovation on the platform. There's 2 that I'd like to start with. One, and I think this is a great one to start with, and props to my old colleagues back at Vodafone for developing this. But we had a very large Sales Cloud org, and a lot of countries and a lot of business units, had a lot of things they wanted to build on the platform. And managing that demand was a real challenge. So rather than wander off and buy something to manage that demand, we built an application in Salesforce, and we managed the entire demand management process, including the calls that were necessary to get sort of more information, and approval for that change in Salesforce. All of that was managed via Salesforce, right? So we really, we became not only really skilled at building Salesforce, but at using it, right? And got and got a sort of an additional value from really experiencing what it was like to be an end user of Salesforce while also being the delivery team that was building it. So that's one use case that I thought was kind of particularly relevant. And another innovative use case that I saw was around an organization which recruited young people, and they, in that recruitment process, they went through quite a rigorous interview process. And that interview process was managed via pen and pencil, and then the information was kind of typed into Salesforce. And so what they did was they utilized Flow with these sort of wizard screens within Flow to firstly remind those interviewers of the questions and capture the data immediately. And that was sort of flowed through, right? So the first few questions laid out on the screen, type in the answers, hit next, next set of questions. And so they were able to speed up that interview process and capture much richer information more immediately in order to give feedback to the wider team that needed that information. Kendall, any interesting use cases that you've seen that maybe will get our attendees thinking in a different way?
Well, I think one thing when we think of nonprofits, we know that the majority of nonprofits have a fundraising use case, right? But what we also see a lot is the use of our Experience Cloud or a portal, and using this for our constituents to be able to access all kinds of information, whether they can collaborate amongst each other or just find out information. Let's say it's for disease eradication or something, just creating a case around homelessness, whatever the case is, using our Experience Cloud. And that might not be so unique, but what is really unique is making sure that we're connecting maybe a marketing tool to this Experience Cloud, which we can now. So Experience Cloud and Marketing Cloud now connect very well. And so as your constituents are clicking around within the community on certain content, now we can capture what they're clicking on, and now you can create journeys and you can target that specific person, family, whoever it is, with information based on what they've been clicking on, and create those targeted journeys. And I think we don't always think about that in the nonprofit world, that, how can we give targeted, very personal experiences to our constituents? And that's definitely one way we can.
No, that's great. And, not only can we, but we're really going to need to, as the sort of the demographics of our constituents change. These younger people have a higher expectation, right? That we know about them. We know the information that they have given us, and that's shared and used in appropriate ways, as they have their experience with our organizations. John, I know you've had a lot of experience of building these of app dev on the platform, right? And so, any use cases that you'd feel like sharing?
I think one of the most interesting ones. I work for a large corporate legal services group, and we were implementing Service Cloud, which of course is it's a Salesforce product. One of the coolest use cases, however, is that they rely on jurisdictional knowledge, and anybody that travels the United States, knows that you can go from your county to another, or from one state to another, and have completely different, not only laws, but the innovation level of a jurisdiction's records is pretty off. Typically, it's green screens and old mainframes. So one of the coolest things that I think, from a use case perspective, and to Matt, what you're talking about is having a common view that works for people, even if you wouldn't think the data resides in there. What we did is we actually used an add-on to Salesforce called Connect. And what Connect does is it lets you connect Salesforce to other data sources, but basically have them in the Salesforce interface so that the user doesn't even know the data is outside the system. So it's a screen layout at Salesforce. They don't have the complexity. So what we're able to do is actually listen for every jurisdiction in the United States, listen on their email signals that they have, and basically build a large knowledge base of every jurisdictional change that occurred into a large data warehouse, and then put that into the Salesforce platform in the case when a user, when one of our support reps had to support one of our customers, they actually had the information on a business license using the map integration that Salesforce. I mean, if you just think about it, they knew exactly where the person was, what the jurisdiction requirements, what the business license requirements were. And this data was very complex, sitting in multiple, data warehouses or lakes, but yet in the Salesforce interface is just another field, or just another component, or just another report. And so I think that's one use case, that thinking out of the box and thinking what the value of Salesforce is and how you can use it. If it's that common experience that your end users are familiar with a portal on top as an extension, then you have one platform to innovate and, really connect to it.
No, I think that's great. And it brings up a great point about integrations, right? They're unlocking that data, right? In order to make it usable. The fact of the matter is that employees, if they have to bounce from one system to another, with the best will in the world, right? They're going to be slower. They're going to not bother. They're going to drop things, right, in that transition. So the more that you can kind of just lay out there, that making that data accessible when it's needed, is like really critical. I mentioned config and code here. I mean, I think one of the great things about Salesforce is that that you can have citizen developers, right? And I think this is a really important concept when we think of nonprofits, where there isn't necessarily a large development team, but it is possible for nonprofits to build on the platform using config. It's powerful enough with simple declarative ways of working that applications can be developed. I know there's a lot of information out there on Trailhead as well to allow organizations to get the skills to do that. I mean, I am able to do that myself, and I am by no means a developer, right? So I really like the idea of organizations sort of encouraging some of their wider teams to learn what they can do, because that actually really unlocks some of the innovative thinking, which I think is a good segue into the third topic, which really is, well, how do we identify these use cases? How do we engage stakeholders to think of Salesforce as a platform to build on, and how do we get that sort of organizational buy-in, right? When we might see a stakeholder who has used a point solution in the past, or they're doing it the way they've always done it, right, and they don't want to change. How do we sort of get them thinking in a new way and sort of encouraging, technology as a sort of fundamental part of the innovative growth of their organization? Kendall, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways of doing this. What I do with a lot of my customers is, it comes back to fundamentals, which quite frankly is system agnostic, right? Can be. So, when we talk about strategy and vision and strategy, and again, including, if you have a field, if you have chapters, 20, 30, 40 chapters out there, getting their insights and doing kind of a vision and strategy to help drive adoption towards Salesforce and what you're doing. Another thing is that continuous improvement. So some of you might have a center of excellence for Salesforce, having a really great process so that users have a way to get their ideas to a centralized place. They can be prioritized and sorry, you threw me off there. So that they can be prioritized. And as users are seeing their ideas being added to, whether it's creating another page layout based on a case type, or, adding a field, or putting some, additional pick list values, whatever the case is, that you're going to get that. It's more of a behavioral change. And then in terms of just driving adoption, it's a lot of training. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Trailhead and all of the amazing learnings that you can do, gamify it. We've been doing that with some of our customers where they were competing for swag based on how far they got in their Trailhead journey. My daughter, who's in college, I just sent her a trail mix and told her, get using this. So, it's just giving a little bit. So I think that helps it. And I think it also comes from the top down. So, we talked about mobile use case, Matt, and, Chatter. If leadership is using this and we're making it a way of how we use the system, we're communicating within the system, we're adding notes to cases or to records within the system, you're going to see other people catch on as well.
Thanks, Kendall. And so, John, I'd be really interested to hear your views on, since you're sort of much more on the IT side, right? And you have been driving this innovation within AACR. How have you gone about engaging the business to look at Salesforce in a wider sense and really as a strategic tool?
It's a great question. As I said, we started with pretty simple purpose and a narrow vision, which was to migrate from an association management platform that was ailing. And today, Salesforce, we have a license for every person in the organization. So how we got there was, business as usual, focus on the migration, and then focus, once you migrate the system, really focus on the core values of Salesforce and try to change the behavior, for us at least, of that initial business unit, gain the trust that, the Salesforce platform is doing everything that the previous platform did and more, and then establish it as the system of record. So where we really took off is when we were able to plug in a lot of these app exchange products, such as Dun & Bradstreet, particularly, and certain plugins that give us data quality and show the organization that not only is Salesforce the membership product and the fundraising platform, but it's now the system of record. It's the customer master. It's the transactional system. So it's, one request at a time, as Kendall said, one request at a time. For us, identify what product management is, what it means to us, how do you submit a request? How do you engage stakeholders, such as in our foundation organization? How do you install a product and then let them configure their business rules? And really for us, it was just, one trust at a time, one department at a time, one division at a time, until really the core executive stakeholders of our organization saw the value. They didn't just see that, I think we're driving the whole time. They didn't see the cost of a Salesforce license. They saw the fact that, wow, that's the only line item that we have now for a platform. We don't have 50 platforms. We have this one, and that number might be sticker shock when you go from system A to B. But now 3 years later, it's our portal for both employees and customers. We run every virtual event off of it. Everything that we do comes into that system. And one other final Salesforce plug, because we're talking about this, is, we went to Marketing Cloud. We went from a industry specific marketing platform to Marketing Cloud. And if it wasn't for Salesforce as the platform, the Marketing Cloud system would not have been successful because of our business rules. The fact that we have members, we have donors, we have students, we have all these different business rules. We actually use the Salesforce platform as the hub with custom routing that sends the information back and forth into Marketing Cloud. So Matt, we grew it from the common pillar, as you would think of, who's in Salesforce and what can they do with it. But then the people in our organization that would have never logged into Salesforce, such as marketing and communications, they're now connected because their platforms, their business platforms, are connected into Salesforce because it's the SSO, and it tells you who a member is, and it tells you who an engagement target is. So really, you build it from the platform, and then you look at integration, and together, Salesforce is our platform to do business at the AACR for almost everything that we do at this point, and it continues to grow.
Thanks, John. Yeah, a powerful story. You raise an important point there, though, around gaining the trust of one organization at a time, right? The idea of internal selling, right? If you're trying to push Salesforce and you're trying to grow Salesforce, and you believe that Salesforce is a platform that can deliver more impact, then you're going to need to do some internal selling. Now, there are resources available to you to help doing that. Like, one is probably Salesforce salespeople. They will help in that. And by the way, that is a great way to sort of utilize them, sort of get them on side, right? Rather than let Salesforce kind of like just wash over, whether it's your business or your IT stakeholders. You can start to sort of work with them, which I've always found to be a much more successful method. And then you're turning people into business champions, right? And you're gaining champions who can help you drive the next use case and the next use case, all of which of course is driving more and more value onto the platform.
Yeah, and if I may, Matt, for anybody who's listening, I mean, let's not forget the value, the partnership today, us as a customer of CRM Science. I think the other thing that nonprofits should think about is, if you look at IT support, and a lot of nonprofits, don't have these robust teams or budgets, you know, I've spent most of my career outside of the Salesforce platform. And what I've noticed is if you work with a partner and you need a full scale deployment or you need resources, right? On most platforms, you have to do a lot of work to make sure that the end product is going to match your expectations. I mean, it's a rigorous, constant battle of, you know, environments and customizations. And I think the one thing that I don't want people to gloss over with Salesforce, and not every partner is perfect, but when you engage with a partner on the platform, you already have a core fundamental platform to start with that you know what's going to happen. So you can communicate, I want you to build X, and you can already envision what that partner is going to deliver. You can set the rules for what they're going to deliver because the platform dictates it. So you're not going to get one product to go one way and work differently than the Salesforce platform. And if you think of any other platform out there, you can build something that looks great, but it's not going to interface properly. It might not meet the security requirements. It may not store the data in your database the way that you would expect it. That is a non-issue with this platform and with working with partners. And so that's something that I think everybody should consider when you think of cost and impact, and every single tag you've put in these slides, the ecosystem between Salesforce themselves and the support they have through accelerators and Trailhead, the platform plugins that you get through App Exchange and your partners, you always know what you're going to you always know what to expect to some degree. Not that every project's perfect, but you know, you cannot forget that when you look at custom development and working with partners. It's a huge strategic advantage. So
no, it's a great point. And the last point I'd like to make here is really when we think about engaging the business, is to really understand the changing demographics of the users who are going to be using these platforms, right? One of the great things about Salesforce is it's mobile ready. I mean, it's not quite, the same experience on the laptop as it is on the mobile, but it's not far off. And when we think about the ability to integrate other applications and build these kind of state-of-the-art apps on Salesforce, the younger people and the sort of the next wave of employees are expecting that kind of experience, right? They are not going to be like accepting using a bad spreadsheet or a kind of water cooler based. Obviously water cooler based processes definitely don't work at the moment, and so I think that's like worth bearing in mind, right? It may be that your current team are able to get by with spreadsheets and a million different apps that they have different logins for, and data not being effectively utilized. But the next cohort of employees is not going to cope with that. And I think we need to really start thinking ahead, or organizations which are stuck in a sort of a legacy mindset when it comes to these applications are not going to be doing as well. And I think this is a really critical sort of like concept when we engage stakeholders. It's like the way organizations have done things up to now is not going to last sort of into the 21st century, and we really need to start looking at changing that. So I do see that we had a Q&A question, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to access the question.
I think it was answered.
Gotcha.
Oh.
I got you, Matt.
I'm sorry, I answered it. I wasn't sure.
I couldn't even get
Fine,
to it.
but I mean, we can discuss it live for a minute as well. There was a question for John about the Connect app, and whether that was a standalone database app that can be integrated with Salesforce.
Sure. So yeah, Salesforce, the product's called Salesforce Lightning Connect. You purchase it from Salesforce. It's a annual charge, and it allows you to connect to any database in the world, whether it be on-prem, cloud-based, Azure, Oracle, and it basically allows you to connect to a single per connection to a data source that basically brings that into the Salesforce system as a read-only object. Therefore, you can use that data to actually drive automation, reporting. So it keeps the data out in the other source, but it materializes it to the user as if it was stored in the Salesforce product.
Yeah, so it is a great product. I've also have quite a bit of experience with it, so I definitely would recommend it to organizations that are looking for a kind of low lift integrations. Any other questions? We always like to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. So do we have any others coming through?
Yes, we've had a couple, and please, anyone who has questions, use the Q&A feature in your Zoom panel. Type them in there, and we'll see them on our end. There was a question around engaging the business, as you had that as a theme. What would you recommend in terms of engaging finance organizations in discussions around Salesforce, especially when a organization rarely looks past the anchor use case or the siloed use case?
No, it's a great question. It's very interesting that finance. I really found finance to be not at the table until the very last minute of doing deals with Salesforce. Right, they were there for the signature, but they weren't really involved. The budget was set. And it wasn't really sort of making sure that the sort of the value and that the value of that purchase was reached in the out years. And coming from the for-profit side, we would have a kind of like a 5-year plan of what we expected to get from a Salesforce investment, and that was monitored year over year. And so anytime we were able to show more value from that purchase, the better, right? It increased the chance of the deal getting, whatever the deal was, getting done. And it also allowed us, on the Salesforce team, right, that was implementing Salesforce, it gave us some leeway then on that anchor use case if there was some challenges on adoption, which there always is, right? Those kinds of far out views of value are always based on assumptions. So having additional use cases kind of allowed us to hedge our bets. I'd love to see finance organizations have a bigger seat at the table when it came to applications in the non-profit space. I think they really bring the right kind of mindset to getting value from a purchase. I don't know, Kendall or John, any thoughts on getting the finance team engaged?
Yeah, I'd be curious if the person who asked that question, I don't know if I can hear you or finite, but there's a couple ways that I could have answered that. So one is the way Matt went ahead and answered it. Some other ways of engaging finance is, well, first of all, finance in many organizations they're also the compliance arm, right? They're also the ones creating the processes and demanding that the process be a certain way, and it can be very difficult to change that. And so one of the things that we do is when we have steering committee meetings with our customers and we meet with them at a quarterly or monthly basis, we invite finance to be a part of these meetings. So you might not necessarily consider, and I think this goes to Matt's point, inviting finance to your implementation stand-up calls, but I think it's really important to have a member of finance riding along for all of these implementations, or even the beginning as you're doing analysis or you're looking at the process. Nobody more than a finance person, as you're looking at a process and making process improvement and then automating the process, nobody gets more excited than a finance person. So
I think one other thing is, there are quite a lot of finance use cases that are available. One might even be from a sort of an employee community perspective, right, to ask finance questions for relevant, budgeting or what have you. So, there are ways to get them on board. Often finance applications are very siloed. So, I know there's a number of kind of like finance apps sort of out there on the web that you can look into and sort of see, almost approach the finance team with a, hey, have you considered this sort of use case? Maybe we need to get you on Salesforce as well.
Yeah, and for us, we call it the platform. We try not to call it, not that we're hiding the word Salesforce, but we call it the platform because it gets really complicated for some. And the way I see it is finance will get on board by being involved in that platform ecosystem and not necessarily asking for Salesforce. So for us, we're providing full reconciliation of every transaction that runs through the business into the financial system. But the other thing we've done recently is we've been able to switch from a pretty older school, payment gateway, something that was, a lot of management work for the finance team. And because of Salesforce, we were able to move to a product in Stripe. And by switching to Stripe as our, global payments provider, that really has brought finance even closer to the value of Salesforce, even though they may not have their fingers on the keyboards in Salesforce directly. But the fact that their operations are becoming smoother, their transaction costs are less now because everything's on the platform. There's other ways to get to that department and without necessarily building apps specifically designed for them, but have them part of that workflow. And that really brings the value.
Right. Thanks, John. Diana, any?
Yeah, someone has shared a more specific use case or an integration with us and is wondering if we have any recommendations around apps or tools that can help integrate Salesforce with SAP ERP.
Well, it's been quite a while since I integrated with SAP, so I'm not an authority, but I will say that when you want to integrate with a system like SAP, depending on what type of information you're trying to integrate and how, how integrated things are, when you think of Salesforce, we're talking a lot about, when we talk about Salesforce, we're talking about the Sales Cloud, and I've alluded to Salesforce Connect, which plugs into Sales Cloud. But, even though this sounds like an enterprise play, the other considerations when I think of SAP is something like MuleSoft, which is a Salesforce product. MuleSoft is a Salesforce company, and that is a very mature, kind of API gateway system that really connects to everything. It already has connectors to SAP. It already has connectors to Salesforce. So, if you're going to do a large scale enterprise integration, point to point, Salesforce to SAP might not be your best bet. Depending on how grand it is, you might want to go with, as I said, something that is out there on the market that is certified to work with Salesforce, something like a MuleSoft, or, there's other products out there that compete. I think that's your best strategy, but it really does depend on the use case. One thing I'll say is Salesforce is API centric. So what the technical people in the room have spent years on, you develop an application, you have to spend your first day connecting to a database. That's out the window. You declaratively say, I want to build a table, I want these fields, and that entire data set is now available to SAP in theory by a single API call. So you can do it with nothing, with no cost. But if you want something that's going to support your business, it's going to be scalable, and that you can support with the ecosystem like this, I would look at something like that.
Yeah, thanks, John. You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, it's definitely the case that it can be done, but there are a number of ways to approach that, and it very much depends on the use case, right? Is that just a little bit of data that someone needs to be able to see, or do you need to, actually manipulate that data? All of that kind of thing will really play into the best fit approach. But we'd be happy to take that one offline. So Diana, if we've got the person's name, then we can reach out.
Absolutely. We have another question around best practices and tools for DevOps. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we do run, my team runs, very much in a kind of sprint, driven mentality, and DevOps can be quite a bit of a challenge in Salesforce if you don't have a strategy because you're working on a single platform. Again, this is a non-Salesforce product, but DevOps is a concept, and then there's tooling for it. We found a partner, an organization that built an integration directly on the Salesforce platform that helps with that. And it's really a concept of having your code managed in a central repository, having your developers spin up a sandbox, develop there, and promote it through the enterprise. But also, Salesforce does provide out of the box, a DevOps, system where you can basically create developer sandboxes called scratch orgs, where you can spin off a sandbox from your production, have everything look similar, develop it, and then go through the traditional Salesforce release of change sets. But yeah, if you do have multiple sprints, multiple teams, multiple components, you definitely do want to use something other than change sets and look at a DevOps tool that's certified for Salesforce.
Yeah, thanks, John. Very much agree. A couple of others that have sort of popped up for us. Capado, I know, is being pushed quite a lot by Salesforce to complement Salesforce DX. So it's quite a wide it's quite a wide set of tool sets. And again, it does depend a little bit on the number of people who are engaging and the complexity of your app dev.
Yeah, and one key point is it depends on what your infrastructure looks like beyond Salesforce. So for us, we have a product called Flowsome, and it works because our platform is Salesforce. So all of our development can go through a Salesforce methodology. But if you do have other systems, then you definitely want to look at something like a Capado or AutoRabbit or something that works in a grander DevOps scheme. Since we're so specific to Salesforce, we're able to get a product that just manages that workflow in Salesforce. So definitely understand what other environments, what your release process is within your organization, how Salesforce fits, and what you have to consider to get it part of your process.
Thanks, John. And I know Kendall has quite a lot of resources available as like accelerators and what have you, and a growing amount of resources, I should say, as well, in this area.
Yeah. I was just going to bring up, because I know we only have a few minutes left, and I also saw there was a question about best practices with crawl, run, walk, run. What I would say first and foremost is please make sure you're checking out some of the Salesforce resources that are available, as simple as Googling Salesforce. But some of the ones that I would bring up, there is a very powerful community where lots of questions are asked and answered. It is monitored by product owners within Salesforce. And specific to the nonprofit arena, there's the Power of Us Hub with all kinds of information about your nonprofit products and use cases. So I would take advantage of that. There are product landing pages within, if you, those who are using Salesforce can go into help and training and see a list of some of the options there. But probably one of the most important ones is there is a customer success calendar. And I'm happy to forward this to anybody if you want to reach out to me directly. It is a customer success. It has everything. Ask an expert for just about every product. You can talk to developers. You can talk to product owners. You can, there's stuff on Agile. There's stuff on multi-factor authorization. It's just a calendar of live webinars, and they're all recorded, so you can watch them afterward. And I think that is a good place to start. In terms of best practices, going back to crawl, walk, run, I would also make sure planning. Make sure you have an executive sponsor, someone who can break through kind of the, the tiebreaker, who can make sure that everyone's on board. Make sure you have a great communication plan. Make sure you have a steering committee. And again, include finance, HR, some of these ancillary areas. Make sure you have a project team that has a regular cadence and is staffed with the right roles, which you can look up and find some ideal staffing for that, depending on your implementation. And also, if you're large enough, I'm not going to say this is for everybody, but if you can develop a center of excellence around Salesforce, so that you've got that knowledge, you've got developers, you've got administrators, you have the right people in there to focus on Salesforce as you grow with the Salesforce ecosystem, it's going to be worth your while.
Thanks, Kendall. So I know that you also wanted to, just in the very last moment, mention the upcoming nonprofit summit. which I think all of the attendees will be interested to hear about.
Yes, so on April 21st, Salesforce.org is hosting the virtual nonprofit summit. This is something we were so excited to do last year before COVID hit. Our first summit was going to be live in New York, but of course it was canceled. So this is the first year. It's an all day. It's like a mini Dreamforce specific to nonprofits. Lots of exciting stuff. You can Google Salesforce Nonprofit Summit and go ahead and register for that. Again, it's April 21st, and it will have some amazing content, but most importantly, Dr. Jane Goodell will be the keynote speaker.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Kendall. Thanks so much, John, for joining me here with this panel. I hope everyone's found it really interesting. I know I have. And I look forward to hearing from everybody. You know, let's keep the conversation going. I'm sure you know how to reach out to us, but if you don't, you can ping us there or call us with that email address or phone number on the screen right now.
Yeah, and everyone is going to receive the recording probably tomorrow. And Kendall, we can add those links that you were referring to that page, as well as the nonprofit summit that's coming up. We will add that to the follow-up email to all of the attendees today.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This was a pleasure. Thanks so much. And thank you everyone to the audience for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending time with us today. Take care.
Thank you.